I'm Cindy Kelly. This is the Atomic Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C., and it is Wednesday, November 15, 2017. And I have with me Suzanne Langsdorf. My first question is for her to tell us her full name and spell it.
My name is Suzanne Martyl Langsdorf, and that is spelled S-U-Z-A-N-N-E. Martyl is M-A-R-T-Y-L, and Langsdorf is L-A-N-G-S-D-O-R-F.
Very good.
I have to spell it a lot
Okay.
in real life.
Yeah. Well, you're here because your father and your mother, who both played a part in shaping the atomic age. Your dad being part of the Manhattan Project, and your mom as an artist afterwards working on the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists designs and other things. So with that, why don't you start and tell us what you can recall about who your father was and where he came from. What was his background?
My father was a physicist, so we learned early on, how important physics was. We learned that it was something that preoccupied him. He was very engaging, very sweet person. He was a great father, very loving, but he was also capable of going off into the clouds. He had a very high forehead. He looked like an egghead. And he was thinking a lot. And then we would have wonderful discussion, dinner table conversations were always, he would end up explaining lots of things. So it was, we knew, and his father was also was a scientist. He was an electrical engineer, Dean Langsdorf. My parents had come from St. Louis, and my grandfather was he started the engineering school at Washington University. So my father and grandfather were both scientists. And
excuse me, I forgot to ask. Could you tell us the names of your father and his father?
My father is Alexander. What was his middle name? No, he didn't have a middle name. He was Alexander S. Langsdorf, Jr., but he wasn't technically a junior because on his birth certificate they didn't spell out the Sus, S-U-S-S. So my father was Alexander Langsdorf, Jr., PhD, doctor, whatever, and his father was Alexander Sus Langsdorf. And what else? My father started at Washington University, but he went to Washington University, then to MIT, and then to Caltech. And then he went back to St. Louis, and then he ended up coming up. He said the Washington University's atomic focus was sort of in medicine. So he thought the nuclear, the research that was being done, which ended up on the Manhattan Project. He basically wanted to work with Fermi. So he came up to Chicago. And he had met my mother through his family, their families knew each other in St. Louis. My mother was a very ambitious young artist who had lots of beaux but wasn't interested particularly in settling down. It had to be the right person who would give her her space, basically, which was unusual in the 30s. So anyway, they moved to Chicago, and I was born after the war.
So what was your mother's name?
My mother's name was Martyl Suzanne Schweig. You want me to spell that?
Yes, please.
M-A-R-T-Y-L was her first name. Suzanne, it's S-U-Z-A-N-N-E. It's the reverse of my name. And her maiden name was Schweig, S-C-H-W-E-I-G. And her father was a well-known photographer in St. Louis who was the son of a photographer who had come from Germany, set up in his own studio. And my father's parents were Dean Langsdorf, and his mother, Elsie, was very political. She'd gone to Cornell, was one of the first women to graduate from Cornell, and was an alderwoman and active in all kinds of things. But anyway, so they met at the Ethical Society of St. Louis, which was their religion, if you can call it a religion. And they hit it off. I think their marriage may not have taken place really because my mother's grandmother, Susie, for whom I was named, she really approved of Alex Langsdorf, but of course that my mother went the other direction. If her family was thinking she ought to marry this guy, she was thinking no. But she told me when she said, we were driving around one day and I looked over and he was driving the car and she said, boy, he's really handsome. He was really good looking. Pictures of him from in his 30s.
So how old were they when they were married? What year was that?
1941. I can't do the math. My father was born in 1912. And my mother was born in 1917. They got engaged. Good friend of my mother's was basically pushing her into, you need to set a date, really. And she just basically threw a big New Year's Eve party and said, this is your engagement party. This was her friend Dorothy Jean Saman in St. Louis. They were a classmate of.
So did it work? Did
Yes.
they get engaged?
Yes, they got engaged. They had a huge party. My grandfather took all these wonderful photographs. So there was a book, because it was professional, high-quality photography, the kind of silver nitrate prints bonded to heavy, the whole thing. Leather bound. Beautiful pictures. Oh, in the 40s with orchids and stuff. And of course, then when the wedding took place, it was a year later. And Pearl Harbor was December 7th, 1941, and they got married on December 31st, 1941. So it was great to get married, but it was this shadow, cloud over the whole proceedings.
So was your father working at Washington University at the time?
Yes. That was 1941. Right. I don't think he moved to Chicago until 42. I did listen to the whole interview that you have recorded, and he talked about his saga of coming to, but I think it was 42. And of course, there was no housing to be had. They'd gotten married. You could be hard pressed to find quarters, and scientists were sleeping on people's couches or bunking wherever they could. Hyde Park was. Well, they weren't building extra housing. People were flooding, coming in from far corners. In all cities, even Washington, D.C.
So I do recall from that interview of your father's that your mother wasn't free to come until June, but that worked out pretty well.
Yes, they, I think Teller vacated an apartment. You remember that whole story?
Yes.
That was the apartment I was born into. And
what was that address? Do you remember?
it was on Kimbark, and I don't remember, 50-something Kimbark. It was one of those wonderful Chicago apartments that had, brick facade and an entryway with a, as I recall, you walked in around a little circular kind of fountain-y thing and into a marble lot. There were probably several entrances around the courtyard, and you would go up the stairs inside. They were Midwestern apartments, lots of space compared to Virginia, D.C. And there was a lot of Chicago university people were there. my mother's, when I was a newborn, and I was born in December 1945, that at one point when I was an infant, she dropped me on my head in the lobby. She was horrified, she said, oh, my baby, whatever. There was one of the residents was a neurologist or something. He said, oh, don't worry. Children have soft heads. She'll be fine. Anyway.
Oh, my goodness.
So that's the apartment. That was 45, yes. And we were there for 3 years until my sister was born, and then they wanted to move out of that. But anyway, she had many stories about that apartment building, which was, of course, the hallways were painted, she called it shit brown, dreary, and she jazzed up, they brought in their furniture that they had collected, whatever, in St. Louis, and she had some very nice couches, matched pair, because I remember these as, in the apartment. She had slip covers made for them in white cotton with piping around them, but she painted Picasso designs on them from one of her favorite painters of all time. So I remember sitting on these Picasso couches. They were a matched pair of Pullman sleep sofas. Pullman, meaning the Pullman railroad car company. They were basically so well made and weighed so much. They're actually in my niece's house in Santa Cruz. The very couches had many different slip covers put on them over the era, but they started off with Picasso to jazz up this apartment. And she painted one of the walls in the dining room, a forest green, and then there was another room that was, anyway, and she tried to spruce up the hallways coming up the stairs. She painted a Roman balustrade on the wall and then had a huge fight with the super of the building, who said they'd get evicted if she didn't paint it out.
She had to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway, so you're getting a bit of flavor of what my mother was like.
A little bit of a rebel.
Yes, extremely independent-minded and very fun-loving. The pair of them loved to have parties.
So who would come to these parties? You remember having?
Oh, no, not
Yes,
really. At the age of 3, I just remember, probably
There
being
were
put to bed. But
Yeah.
it was always, I'm sure there were scientists, they all hung out together. It was stressful and it was always, my mother always complained, forever though, when you had the scientists over, the men went in the corner and talked shop. That's never going to change.
Yes, exactly.
My mother would try to mix it up. But of course, they all drank, everybody drank and smoked, so that sort of loosened things up. Everybody smoked. My father smoked Pall Malls. I don't think they even make those cigarettes again. Remember Pall Malls? The red package with the white crest on it? Filterless.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Everybody smoked.
Certainly Oppenheimer did.
And my mother said, it's kind of, she smoked because everybody smokes, but she painted, and of course she used oil paints. And you've got turpentine sitting around, it's you have to be kind of careful.
Yes.
She would also paint with casein paints, and those are more, and gouache, but basically her medium was oil paint until acrylic was invented in the 60s, and she switched over because at that time we were living in this wooden redwood house. She said, a wooden house with oil paints? I mean, if you take oil-soaked rags and dump them in a corner, they'll combust by themselves. Anyway, the parties were, she made a mean martini.
That was also characteristic of an
It was.
Oppenheimer party.
Yes, martinis.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, it's a vehicle for what? Just gin or vodka. Anyway, so the parties were, but that 45 to 48, we lived on Kimbark. And then my sister was in the offing. She was born in August of 48. They kept looking, they looked for a house to buy, and Hyde Park was quite pricey. And I'd say that there was a lot of population pressure, but no place for people to go, and they didn't have a lot of money, so they ended up buying a row house. I guess you call them a brownstone. They're kind of like the Brooklyn, New York stone facade. Walk up the steps to the front door, kind of. And Woodlawn, between 60th and 61st on Woodlawn. There was a nurse's residence along 60th Street, was along the Midway there. And they bought this house and did a lot of work on it. And my father added a bathroom, because probably only had one. He put in another bathroom and all this stuff. And so we were there until 52. So it was 4 years in this house. Well, actually, my father had to go to Argonne. Excuse me. He was working at Argonne, and to get to Argonne from Hyde Park, if you can imagine where the two are located, you have to travel west from the lake out into the hinterland, because Argonne was called Site A. And it was probably 20 miles across the expanding, or the west reaches of the city. It wouldn't have been so bad if there hadn't been 7 railroad grade crossings between Hyde Park and Argonne. And so he would carpool. And it was nerve-wracking because you didn't want to get stuck waiting for a freight train to pass. And men being men, a lot of them would see the barriers start to come down, and they'd try to gun it to get across before they came down. So he had tales of, suffering in the carpool out to Argonne. He said, "We got to move. We got to leave the city." When we lived in the wrong side of basically the Midway, my mother said that, of course, they put us in nursery school at the University of Chicago. There was like the lab school for elementary school, but there was also nursery school and preschools, and it was all sort of an extension of the education department of the university. So there were a lot of teachers there who were, not student teachers, but they were studying teaching or child psychology. So they would observe children having fights. Let's break it up. They're watching this thing. Who started it? Whatever. Anyway, it was across the Midway, and she had to arrange. We couldn't walk. I mean, it was, it was urban, and it was basically she had to have a car service drive us to our preschool. And we couldn't play out in our front yard. It was basically an urban life, and it was getting more and more gritty while we were there. So the pressure was building for us to sort of leave Hyde Park. But they loved Hyde Park, the whole milieu. All their friends were there. The city, the museum in town. And so
where did you end up moving to?
Well, we got packed into the back of the car and driven all over, my sister and I anyway, driven all over suburban Chicago area in the vicinity of Argonne. Lombard, Hinsdale. I remember looking at one house after the other. My mother wanted a studio. She took the biggest bedroom in the Woodlawn house upstairs in the front with the best light. That was her painting studio. They took the back bedroom. And she had to have a house that had suitable studio. And not all houses have rooms in them that, you can turn into a studio. So we looked and looked and looked and looked, and nothing was suitable. And then they heard through friends about a house of an architect who had built himself a house in Schaumburg, which is, where's that? It's northwest suburbs, it's sort of on your way out towards Rockford. And he had been offered a position at the Yale School of Law. And he built this house. It was his test piece for himself with his wife and son. And he said, oh my God, who am I going to sell this house to? I'm going to go to Yale. But what do I do with my home? It's like, okay, so this turned out to be a house and family marriage made in heaven. But I remember, this was all before the freeway, so we got in the car and basically drove, it seemed like forever, out into the country. Because Meacham Road at the time was a 2-lane gravel road. It hadn't even been paved yet. There was no Kennedy. Basically, to get out there, you triangulate it out. You go out Northwest Highway, you turn north, you go west, you turn north, whatever. From Hyde Park, it's over 40 miles now on the freeways. So if you can imagine what it might have been in 1952. I think we went looking, it was in the summer. And the house was surrounded by a field. And I guess because Schweiker was leaving, whatever, he hadn't had him. It was basically full of ragweed. My sister and I didn't care. We went running through the field while my parents were wandering around looking at the house. And of course, that set my sister up with her various allergies. She was like ruined for life because of that. We came running in, probably all covered with cockleburs and ragweed pollen. But we ended up renting the place for a year, and then we bought it. They bought it. And it was a stretch because, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it was a fantastic house, which is national, it's a landmark property now. The architect was Paul Schweiker, and I'll spell that, Schweiker. And the house is, it was made a landmark property because the local water district tried to condemn it, to tear it down so they could have the 7 acres around it to flush out their parcel. And my parents went to bat to preserve it, and it got landmark status about 3 or 4 years early. It's because it hadn't turned 50 years old quite yet, but it's now it's the Schweiker Langsdorf House and Studio. It's a Schweiker House Trust. Village of Schaumburg owns it, and there's a website. I think it's schweikerhouse.org. Anyway, so we ended up living in that place, and my parents preserved the house, but they did some things to it to make their own bedroom on the north wing, which had been the architecture shop for Schweiker, but they didn't like put up drywall and try to paint things over, and they kept the character of the house. And it was like a third child in our family because it took so much care and so much work and attention. My sister and I said it was a sibling, sibling rivalry. And it was always something. They both worked on it all the time. My father worked at the lab during the week. He'd come home, he'd work in the garden, he'd work on the house. Worried about the roof, the plumbing, this. It was a never-ending saga, and it continues to this day. With 7 acres of grounds. It had actually had a professional landscape architect. His name was Franz Lipp, L-I-P-P, who worked with Schweiker and planted all the things around. And one of his insane things, however, though, was planting a willow tree because it's so beautiful, right? But it was right outside the bathroom at the front of the house. And willow trees love water, so the roots kept growing into the sewer. So anyway, it was a great house. We finally, moved out, but my parents' friends were all still down in Hyde Park. And my piano teacher was still in Hyde Park, so we made treks regularly by car into Hyde Park. My father's commute was no longer across grade crossings, but it was 25 miles from our house to Argonne, down 2-lane roads.
So that was a good hour drive.
Yeah, and it was before cell phones or anything, so he would leave work. You can imagine when you're in the Illinois winter and you leave work and it's dark. We didn't have daylight savings time then, I don't think, but we just, got dark at 4:30. And you'd have to drive home in the ice and the snow. My father he was an Eagle Scout, so had been an Eagle Scout, and he was very cautious, and he always carried, a bucket of sand and a shovel and you name it in the car. But I remember him being late coming home, and my mother would go sit in the living room, sort of watch the driveway, I guess how wives do. She liked to watch birds, so there was a pair of binoculars there by the window, but she'd sit there and, because, typical American family of the 50s and 60s, dinner's ready at 6 o'clock. Dinner was ready, no dad. Where is he?
So you'd wait for him to come.
Yeah, we'd wait, but she'd worry because driving, it's dark, snow and ice. I didn't think of it. I said, I'm hungry. Where's dinner? Waiting for your father to get home. But he'd make it, and he was usually tired. He'd want to lie down before dinner, you have to heat it up. But usually if it wasn't winter, he would come home, he'd rest for a little bit, then we'd have dinner. He always had a fountain pen in his pocket, and then we'd have dinner. He'd explain things. The first table we had was a old-fashioned, didn't look good in this house, you can imagine, but it was one of those white enamel tables, and they actually have one in the Smithsonian here. There's a typical American kitchen from pre-war, and it was a white enamel top table with a wooden base and a drawer on each side of the table, big straight legs. And of course, my grandmother had one too in her kitchen, and there would be a ball of rubber bands in one drawer, side of the drawer. And we didn't have aluminum foil then, but there would be like wax paper with a foil backing on it. It was like waterproof paper that things would come wrapped in. So you saved all of that too. So that was in the other drawer. It's like a period piece, right, in my mind, anyway. And he could actually write on this tabletop to explain things, because he was always explaining. We'd ask questions about stuff, and he'd start drawing pictures about it. Because that's what he did. He designed experiments and designed equipment to have the tech people make for his experiments. He'd always have machinists and stuff, and he was always talking about a particular machinist who either was extremely talented or somebody who was in the wrong field entirely.
So did he ever try his hand at machining something if he got frustrated?
Well, he might have. Yeah, he plumbed the whole lab. at Argonne, because he said they had a building, they put up a building, and it was a cement shell, as I recall from the interview. And they had to go in and build the whole lab from the beginning. I'm sure he cut pipe and stuff. I don't know if he ran a lathe, but he made stuff. He made things for our house. He was quite handy. I remember the Christmas that he got, his present was a DeWalt table saw. My mother had it delivered, and we had it set up in the garage, and we let him out there to see it, and it was, oh my gosh. And he made things like bookshelves, and actually one of the heating grates in their bedroom was it was a lattice over a radiator in the floor. And you can imagine what hot air rising over a wood lattice will do over time. So Schweiker's grates were literally falling apart. They were like a bunch of puzzle pieces there. So he took it upon himself to make new grates. And they were, I don't know how you call it, it was like using a router, so it was like teak, like a grate on a ship deck, perfectly joined. He made that. Because when he was growing up, he told us about how it was his job as a little boy to get up and get the furnace started in a cold house. And it was cold, and it was a coal furnace. So he figured out ways to get things started, when he wouldn't have to get out of bed. I don't know. It usually involved some kind of apparatus that he would make, but he took fans apart and put them back together again. He knew how all that stuff worked. Because his father wrote a book that still was a classic, at least until the mid-20th century. It was called The Principles of Alternating Current Machinery. It's out of print, but it was McGraw-Hill was publishing it, and it was still selling in India up until 2000 or something.
So was your grandfather a good tutor to your dad?
I
or he just
don't know how that worked. My grandfather was a completely different he was more of a professor, and they lived in a house. I don't think he did a lot of housework, kind of manual things. My father was, as I said, the Eagle Scout. He was the kind of person who could look and, he trained my sister and me to sort of think where things, because of physics, that things put in a certain position will fall over. Or he could secure a load in a car. It took you twice as long to get it out because you had to undo all the nuts and things. But, how to keep things you could look and see things were unstable, He actually made us he had seat belts installed. He knew that Europeans had seat belts in their cars long before they ever were put in American cars. And he had seat belts installed in this Ford station wagon that they bought. Because he knew, jam on the brakes, your kids go flying. Hadn't occurred to that many other Americans, but now you can't you can't have seat belts put into a car. They have to be original equipment. But anyway, yeah, he was, he could see things, he knew what was going on with the roof. You just know, at his memorial service, Rocky Cobb, who is astrophysicist at University of Chicago, his eulogy to my dad said, this was my mother's memorial. He said, Alex Langsdorf and Martyl Langsdorf were artists and scientists, and these scientists and artists are the noticers of the world. These are people who notice things. They say, why? What's this? What's that? What causes that? Why does this work this way? Why does that one? How can I fix that? And so that carried over for in everything. It's kind of hard to skate under any radar in a house like that, though, I have to tell you, growing up. My mother was always telling me to pick up my feet because I would turn up the carpet edges, you know. And living when we moved to this house, which was a architectural masterpiece, work of art, the natural tendency of a child to park all their belongings from the kitchen door, you know, when they come in, back to their room, drove her wild. So she'd follow me like, pick up your stuff. And I couldn't leave it, you know, I had twin beds, and so, long story. Always have to, sorry, you have to pick everything up. We don't have rooms, you don't have rooms where you can shut the door and hide the mess. I'm sorry, but that's the way this is, so clean your room up, put that away, and pick up your feet.
So the rest of the living spaces in your house were
they're all open.
Limits for children? Or?
No, we used the entire house all the time. It was just all open. Let's say that the roof had a bit of an overhang, but the roof itself was 4,000 square feet of flat roof in the Illinois prairie. Most houses in that part of the world have pitched roofs so the snow can fall off. So he actually had Schweiker built a bit of a grade, and he had, it's very Japanese, well, the Japanese actually do a lot of water control, but it was flat roof, sort of prairie style. My father ended up having heating elements put in the downspout area, the drain area, to, what do you call it, melt the ice dams that naturally were created. So water flow was, he had to keep that in mind too all the time. You know, he was always going up on the roof, and 4,000 square feet of roof was a large expense to maintain or to replace. And worrying about the grade, a very slight grade, even though it appeared flat. And there were multiple levels and places where things joined, so there was flashing, places for water to go. When things didn't join quite the way they should. So, but it was 4,000 square feet of roof, and then there was probably 3,500 square feet of space in living room, solar bedroom, the children's room that Schweiker added on at the end. And he had been married 16 years before he and his wife had a child, so the house was built without a room for the kid. Kitchen, it was open planning housing. People are building their houses like this now, big open rooms, multi-purpose. The dining table was in a corner, you know, right near the kitchen, but in every room that you were in, you could look through beautiful sight lines to other places or to windows and to see out. You can see pictures of it online. And it's appeared in a number of books, too. Julius Schulman wrote a book, I can't, was it Chicago Architecture or something, it's in there. Or was it a book on mid-century modern? I can't remember, but. So it's mid-century modern, which is the big rage now. Schweiker built it in 38, he started building it in 1938. So he was there from 38 to 52.
And how long were you there, or your family?
My mother lived there till she died, and it actually, well, it was condemned by the Metropolitan Water District. We call it the water people. MWD, which was a big, huge EPA-sponsored water treatment facility for the Chicago metro area. And it's actually the water district, these are separate districts around in Illinois, and they're sort of their own fiefdom. But the plant was there, and then they were surrounded by maybe 800 acres, some huge plot. There was this little notch where the house was that they wanted to, you know. We were right on the border of Schaumburg Township and Elk Grove Village. It was condemned. My parents went ballistic, and, well, they knew half of Chicago and lots of lawyers, or their friends, the Sawyers, and they basically mounted a campaign, you know, and artists and architectural people who, you know, were into preservation. This was in the 80s. So they won landmark status, and so the Water District became the owner of this place. They had built. My parents got paid for the property, and then they paid back out of the proceeds. Basically, were reserved for a life tenancy. So it was really actually a wonderful thing because they got paid a pile of money for the house. They got somewhere to live. They didn't have to pay Cook County property taxes anymore because it was not their own house. And any big ticket items, somebody else had to pay for. Of course, they didn't do a particularly good job for it. They didn't really want to own this house. And I'm not sure how long it took. 15, 20 years, Schaumburg actually negotiated with the water plant and decided to buy, because the village of Schaumburg had other historic properties, not anything like this one, but they had some Lutheran churches and old Victorian-style homes in the center of town from the mid-19th century. It was a crossroads of Schaumburg Road and Roselle Road, and this little village basically had 500 German farmers, and then the biggest township in Illinois with almost nobody else in it. It's the breadbasket out there where they raised. You had sheep, cabbages, tomatoes, corn, wheat, I don't know, alfalfa. So for us living out there with nobody nearby except the farm, the roll wings across the road. There were a lot of roll wings out there. In fact, there's a road that used to be Highway 53. It was called Rollwing Road. They call it Rawling Road now. Like the other road south of us was called Nerge, Nerge. I don't know how you pronounce that in German, probably Nerge. So it was Germany out there. And everyone from the city started moving out in the 60s. My parents were liberals, and they supported Adlai Stevenson, and we were in the heartland of Eisenhower. We were always a little bit, our friends were in Hyde Park. We were surrounded by farmers. There was, and she knew them. We were civil to people. We knew who was around us. We had Farmer Pierce behind us. So I'd pick up apples. Schweikert planted an orchard behind the house, which was beautiful. It was 2 cherry trees, 4 apple trees, and 2 pear trees, and a partridge and a plum tree. And the apple trees do what apple trees do, and so do the pear trees. They're dropping stuff all over, and you have to pick that up. So one of my jobs was, my sister and I would rake apples into this cart, and then we'd go wheel it sort of up behind us there, and tip them through the fence. There was a barbed wire fence between us and the Pierces, and all the pigs would come, and that was fun to watch, I must say. So we were nestled in this 7 acres. There was a gravel pit to the south of us. The whole area around Chicago like that, it's full of what's called glacial moraines. It was sort of the area where the glaciers, not the terminus, I would think that was farther south, but they dropped their loads they ground up rock as they moved south. 10,000 years ago, and as they retreated, they left the Great Lakes and a ton of gravel. And then people mined the gravel, so they would dig out vein of gravel, and when they'd run out of gravel, they'd just leave the hole there. So there was this wonderful sort of a hill and then a pit. People dumped stuff in the old farm equipment, old TVs, whatever. Yeah, I'm sure parents, I wonder if there's anybody buried out there, because that was the whole Capone era. all the farms, a lot of the farms out in suburban Chicago ended up being stills, distilleries. Chicago has some wonderful history. Not just the Manhattan Project, all the gangsters in the Windy City. Anyway.
So let's see. Let's go back to your mother, or yeah, after the war, your father helped found the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, this was all hearsay to me because, well, I mean, I was a child. But I knew my parents were always, my mother was working on, she was the art editor for the magazine. Actually, she says she was, they needed, it was the Bulletin was a newsletter. I mean, I think as the scientists they'd unleashed this monster or whatever that they had created, and then they started, it was a war effort, but as the war wound down and the prospect of using it, and then Truman used it and said, what are we going to do, How do we tame this, How do we put the genie back in the bottle? No can do. They suddenly said, well, the war effort's over, now what do we do? If they were going to make it into a magazine, not just a stapled together mimeograph newsletter, needed a cover, needed some kind of artwork. And my mother said, well, I was probably the only artist they knew. And she was a tame artist, right there in the thick of it. A drinking buddy. She was a big pal of Fermi. She loved Enrico Fermi. I mean, they all had FBI tails, followed him around all the time. All of them did.
During or after the war, or both?
During, and yeah. Well, it was a whole military operation, right? And they didn't have CIA then. It was the OSS, right? The FBI. Was it Hoover? Even then? Uh-huh. Herbert Hoover? J. Edgar Hoover. And the goons. They were apparently the gumshoes or whatever. Everybody knew who they were. They all. And my mother said, I think they tried to shake their tails just for fun. Go right. But anyway, she did a lot of the artwork, and she had other artists who would help her. Just to provide some design sense to this, basically it would have been some boring, all typewritten copy, but you do a magazine, you do it in 3 columns, and you break up the columns, and they have these little, like in the New Yorker. I don't know what they're called, but they're little pen and ink drawings, little black and white things that may or may not have anything to do with the article that's in there. My mother painted all the time. That was what she did. So this was just a side adventure. But she designed the cover. And she was the first, she's called the clock lady. That's what she called herself. She designed what ended up becoming the Doomsday Clock. And it was the idea of basically the bewitching hour, the midnight hour, things happening at midnight. It's just in our consciousness, from fairy tales. I always thought it was Cinderella, the pumpkin, your coach turns into a pumpkin at midnight. But anyway, something's going to happen at midnight if you aren't careful. And that's kind of what popped into her mind, and so she did the hands of a clock. She liked the graphic image of it, too. And so she put that onto scoped it out, I think. Anyway, so that stuck, and it was, they changed the color. They put the hands at, maybe it was like 10 or 12. No, it was not quarter of, but like 14 or 13 to midnight. And the numbers were just, I think they were square-ish dots on a watch face. And they changed the color of it. It was reddish or greenish or grayish or whatever. Every month they changed the color of it, I think. And then somebody got the idea of when things were happening, they started changing the time. Now that's a big deal. Yeah, but my father was, I'm sure they had lots of meetings and discussions of what to do. He was very upset by what was going on. And he was on a lot of committees, went to a lot of meetings, and when he just gave up after a while because people stopped really listening to the worriers and we were raised with a healthy regard for radiation because he knew what it could do. He having worked in labs and seen accidents happen. I grew up in the era of radium dials on my watch. We all know what happened to the radium watch face painters. They licked their brushes with the radium paint. My father somebody gave him was a typewritten report. I think it was from the Army Department. Looked like a master's thesis or something. It was a report from all the people who'd gone into Hiroshima and Nagasaki and reported on what they'd seen. Here was this report, and it was on the bookshelf next to where I had to practice my piano. And of course I read it when I was supposed to be practicing. 14 years old. Oh, yeah. I don't think many people have read anything like that. None of my friends ever did. He told us about how, he wore lab coats. They wore these radiation monitors on their clothes. He took us to Argonne Lab and took us on a tour. And got to see the chambers where they worked on toxic things inside behind a LED screen, looking through glass, whatever, some isolation chambers. Saw how they do that. Meanwhile, all these guys are smoking they were smoking, working with beryllium, and anyway. So yeah, it was just part of, I know that people use those Xray machines that were out in shoe stores. We go out to buy shoes, and my father would go yell at the shop people that you shouldn't have these things. They're dangerous. What? Our dentist used to hold the film. He had X-ray. He ended up losing his arm to cancer, and then made it his mission to get the rest of this was in this dentist building downtown what was that building? Anyway, it was full of dentists, and he went in and tried, the dentist, after losing his arm to cancer, we had a one-armed dentist, if you can imagine. Tried to get all the other dentists who were using, holding the films in their patients' mouths to cease and desist that. So yeah, my father talked about that stuff, but it wasn't to scare us, it was just to have us educated. I could think now, looking back on it now, for freak out department, right? If you think of your kids being exposed to stuff like that, but who knew, right? And then, of course, we had the whole Cold War and duck and cover, bomb shelters. Oh yeah, right. It's just
He didn't subscribe to
no.
bombs.
No. He said, the living will envy the dead. If you think you can survive in a bomb shelter, and what are you coming out to? Yeah. But my mother she livened things up. She said, scientists they're kind of I don't know, she said that they needed to be livened up, essentially, that they don't see the world the way artists do. They notice things, but they're in their own universe. And there's very few scientist artists. I think Bobby Wilson at the Fermi Lab was a poet and a sculptor as well as being a physicist. She admired him for that. My father was like, he liked art, but and was quite sensitive to it, but he didn't really have the language to describe it. But he really admired what she did and let her do her thing, which was a condition of their marriage, of course. And of course, I don't think she wanted really particularly to be a mother, because knowing what that entailed. So I think there was a bargain that happened there that he had to be a very involved dad. So he was very involved, which was not the thing then. If you look back at Mad Men, women took care of the kids. And my mother always had help. So during the day when he was working, we had a live-in nanny in Chicago, not out in the country, but then we were all, in school. But my father was the one who came. He'd come home from work, and I remember him putting my sister and me to bed and reading us our stories. Probably falling asleep more often than not reading the story. Him falling asleep, not me.
That's great.
He was the kind of guy, I would say, on the side, as soon as you have to go to all these lectures in the lecture hall or to go to a conference, and you sit in the room, as soon as they turn the lights down to show the slide, off he'd go. I mean, not off, yeah. He was a good napper.
That's talent.
Mm-hmm. His father was the ace of that. He would take my sister and me to movies when we visit them in St. Louis. And he'd park himself down there. He'd lean back. He said, "Wake me when it's over." And immediately go to sleep on command. It's part of compartmentalizing or something. I don't know.
So, what else can you tell us about your parents?
I think my father was sort of a gentle soul. He was very. He had a solid core, but he was not somebody. He was sensitive to people's feelings, really, and he liked to. He had colleagues that he would be friendly with at work, and he'd want to kind of socialize with them, but my mother didn't particularly like them. And she didn't have much patience for people if she didn't really like them, or they weren't really her kind of person. Maybe they didn't drink, or they weren't good conversationalists, or I don't know, sort of colorless as a couple. If you'd invite them over, the husband would, Alex and his colleague would talk, and she'd be trying to, she called it, squeeze a turnip or something. Anyway, so she was more like, well, I don't have patience, but there was a bit of a clash, she wanted to, and of being an artist who was ambitious and a career, wanted to sell paintings and stuff, she wanted to, her patrons were people who had more money, and she said, you can't just sell to other artists. You can trade with other artists, but artists aren't going to buy your pictures. Rich people are going to buy your pictures. So she was good at that, and so they liked to give parties. Even when people loved to come to our house when we moved out to Schaumburg. they would make this trek out there because it was like going to a park. Beautiful house, somebody who, had the pitcher of martinis there, and beautiful, there was a peony flower garden in the back. She started giving this annual party early on. She called it the Peony Party. And it was the first weekend in June when the peonies started to bloom. Anyway, so my parents loved to entertain and always busy, always working on the house. And we were, as we said, we were isolated really because we didn't have a lot of neighbors around. And I think that's one of the reasons that my mother loved being there, was that she could control access to her for her time. And vacations, we would generally, we wouldn't just go somewhere to go somewhere. Take a cruise or whatever, or go. We would go visit family in St. Louis. But she would go to New York to do galleries or something. And there was a regular summer. We started going with Sam Allison and his family to their family cottage up in Three Lakes, Wisconsin. That was a vacation, kind of. But most of the time, we made some major trips places, but my mother always said, we go where we're invited, and we go visit people in interesting places. Or they went because of, my father went to Harwell in England. We went there for a year. And 1952, they went on a much, I guess, postponed honeymoon European trip. Because they got married at Pearl Harbor time in the war, and then they had 2 kids, and it's like no honeymoon. So they decided to go. They went with the Allisons, somebody else, another couple, and they parked my sister and me. I say parked, but they found this very upscale Swiss boarding school for the summer and put Sandy and me there. Left us there, then went off on this grand tour around Portugal and Spain and France with their friends. That's a whole other saga. I was 7 and my sister's 5 and don't speak French, and here we are in Gstaad. I have wonderful memories of that because it was like, oh my God, from the Illinois prairie to the mountains. And
so you enjoyed it? It came out okay?
I hated it while I was there, but in retrospect, I adapted essentially. I was like, "What? Where'd you go? Where's my parents?" And it's like, "Oh," and then of course, you better eat and sleep. They say it's sort of like, is that movie Madeline and although it wasn't nuns, it's Swiss. My mother said she felt perfectly comfortable leaving her daughters there because we were with the Swiss. And they had a ball. They showed up in the middle of our stay there, and my mother had bought an outfit in Spain and had her hair cut. And I didn't hardly recognize her. Of course, she didn't recognize us because the Swiss had cut off my hair, and my sister's too, because they weren't about to spend the time to braid 2 little squirmy kids' braids. And they kept feeding on. The food was good. And so we both put on like 10 pounds and had our hair cut. So we had this meeting, and she said, well, we're going to France now. Oh, okay. So that was growing up with scientists and artists and whatever, and then we didn't have, always sort of busy around keeping ourselves amused in the country without neighbors and stuff. We had school, but we couldn't play with our neighbor kids or classmates. Not that we didn't have friends. My mother would have the obligatory birthday party, whatever. And then we, of course, in school, we had swim lessons, so we'd go to the swimming pool and stuff. So as we lived out there, the city, civilization encroached upon us. started with the Kennedy Expressway. And it made it a little easier to get back into Chicago, of course. But I used to take the train into, my mother encouraged all these things. I like to draw. Personally, I inherited my mother's, I like to draw, and I drew all the time, and she saved my drawings, and she said I drew better than she did. But she was, I think she really meant it, but she didn't know whether I'd be an artist or not. But I ended up sort of inheriting my great-grandmother's love of needlework. So I became the sewing person in the house. So I would have to mow the lawn and weed the strawberry patch and help clean up the kitchen. And I augmented my allowance by hemming things. I actually enjoyed doing it, and I learned to sew, and that's a whole nother saga. And my sister was she's more like my mother. I was more like her personality, and had my father's kind of bone structure and math gene. She's kind of artistic as well, but she always liked to knit and to weave. But neither of us became scientists, but my sister did get a math degree. And I was good at math, but I had a bad start at it because we spent the year in England, and I got plopped into this. The English school system and the American are completely different. And I got into like third form or something. I was 13. They'd already been doing algebra for 2 years in this Catholic girls' school. Our Lady's Convent, Abingdon, Berkshire. And if you've never had even the slightest introduction to algebra and you're suddenly in a class where they're doing math, algebra, I couldn't grasp simultaneous equations. I still probably couldn't do one now, but I couldn't grasp it, and my father was incapable of helping me to understand it. The big explainer, he'd just start yelling, which is no way to, Now my son, who was named Alex, also Alexander, not Langsdorf, he has my late husband's name, Alexander Hasha. He's a mathematician, and when he was in graduate school, he tutored like med students who had to take calculus to get their degree, to tutor someone who was trying to grasp the finer points of calculus. Well, if you can't explain it one way, you have to try another way, and another way, and another analogy, and whatever, until the light goes on. And it takes patience. And my father would lose. He had patience to explain something that he wanted to explain that, really interested him, but somehow explaining to his daughter, who he thought ought to be able to get it, but didn't quite. So anyway, I did place out of math at the University of Chicago, and that was the last I ever did with it. He kept saying, "You can do it," I actually did, do all right on it on the SATs or whatever. It's just you get a complex about some things early on in life, and then and my mother was she was very organized and everything, but you try to talk to her about things with numbers, and she said her famous line was, "I'm innumerate." Anyway, it's hard to give a picture to somebody else of what people are like, but my mother was very, she was fun-loving and sort of, like that, what they say, if you follow all the rules, you miss all the fun. You heard that quote? she liked to say rules were made to be broken. She had this attitude about things where she'd say, she was in this girls' school when she grew up. She went to a private girls' school called Mary Institute, which was, it still exists in St. Louis today. It was quite reputable, and her mother taught art there. But she went to Mary Institute, and, you know, girls' school, there's a lot of rules. But she said, I was the kind of person, if they told you to sit down, she'd stand up. And there was no gum chewing, of course, but she would chew on a prune pit so that it looked like she was chewing gum, and they would try to, you know, tell her to, you know, stop chewing gum. She said, I'm not chewing gum. There's this appositional, this needs to kind of dig. So, yeah. But thankfully the two of them, Martyl and Alex, actually agreed on the big ticket things as far as raising kids. They never really argued. You couldn't play one off against the other. They both had this, they both came from German stock. And it's like, you know, follow the rules, be a good citizen, do what you're supposed to do, practice your piano, eat your spinach, you know. But my mother was like, because she was so visual and part of this attitude of, it's like, do things for your own good, get very critical because you're afraid your kid's not going to turn out right and you want them to follow the rules. It's kind of stifling. Yeah. Have somebody always monitoring your behavior. Kids are always going to be like that, right? Why are you always on my case? But she did also know that, you know, her own parents were so much like that. She was just doing how she'd been raised in a way, and she backed off. You know, when we were adults, she knew. You know, she got her own life to lead. She just, you know, we've raised you. Okay. You know, you could sometimes sense a disapproval somewhere. Usually it's what you're wearing. It's like, But growing up, you know, when she bought our clothes, we had to sort of look good in the house. I always thought brown was not my good color, and orange and stuff, but it looked good in this wooden house and everything. She's the kind of person that, you know, you need to all go together, right? Plus, she was not a frilly person, and I know I went through a very frilly floral phase. Little girls tend to do that. At least this little girl did, and that was beaten out of me. Not literally, but, you know, didn't go with the house. And my father was oblivious to all this. Actually, he did notice that since my sister and my mother were more alike and tended to, I look at it as ganging up on me, which they did. I tell my sister about it now, and she said, that was terrible. And my father once, in a moment of candor, said, you know, I did notice how it really bothered me. And I'm thinking to myself, well, he's telling me. And why didn't you say something? Why didn't you let me know that you could, you know, that I didn't have to take it so much to heart? But I survived, so. You always see things, you know, as you're an adult, you just have no clue what was going on when you were a kid. Your feelings get hurt. You know, we did not have a television until the Kennedy-Nixon debates in 1960. We bought a used one, and when that broke, we got another one for the next election. So that's, you know, and piano lessons and academics and stuff. It was a wonderful, unusual childhood, I have to say, because of the marriage of art and science and unique location in a beautiful house with not a lot of distractions, but, you know, you end up being really appreciating nature when you live in a place like that. And your mother's showing to just sitting there admiring, you know, the birds feeding the birds and looking at the birds, seeing the snow, all the seasons. She was a landscape painter, so.
She painted your landscape. Right?
She painted all, yeah, she would paint all the views around from the house, or looking, outside on the grounds and looking to the different views. And they would, when she would travel, it would be to places that were beautiful. She would go look. They went to Japan for my father's work, and that really inspired her. Anyway, in England, when we lived in England, she went around to north of England, and she painted there. But she sold most of her work, so those works are out there now. Some of them are coming up on eBay in various places, but, anyway.
You and your sister have, I assume, a collection.
I have quite the collection. I've got more than I can hang, so it's like a museum in my house where I have things squirreled away in closets. And she has works that she didn't sell that were in the house that we ended up bringing home, and there's still some of her work, a good deal of it, not all. She had works hanging in her house that were other artists besides her own, and that's there. So, and then of course a lot of work. My mother's brother had a lot of her stuff, and he died recently, so the Martyls that were in her brother's collection they've all gone to California. My sister has 3 daughters. So, yes, the art endures, and people actually, friends of hers who had works, when they've died, people turn around and say, "Do you want it?" It endures. And the Bulletin stories, and now we're sort of part of this whole, it continues. And you're preserving even my memories. So my son can go. I gave him the link to Alex Langsdorf.
Oh, good.
And he's listened to it. He just listened to it straight through. He was enthralled.
Oh, it's a wonderful interview.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great interview.
Thank you so much for doing that.
Comes out
Mm-hmm.
so well.
My sister and I said, when we first listened to it, it kind of freaked us out because we knew that voice so well. But he was younger than my sister and I were when we were listening to him.
Yeah, it's fun.
A young man.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
he was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very perceptive.
Mm-hmm.
Very,
Oh, he was yes. He was an encyclopedia, too. And he loved to talk about stuff. And I remember sitting up in here I go again. Driving to Oaxaca at night, of course, when you're crossing from Illinois across the center of the U.S. and Texas, and looking at the stars. He used to be talking about the cosmos.
Wow.
To his daughters. So that's the kind of, But he liked to talk to us. It wasn't like we were these foreign beings. I'm sure there are a lot of scientists who couldn't be bothered with their kids. Anyway.
That's very nice.
And we spent a summer in Los Alamos, so all these cool places because of his work. And everywhere we went, my mother was looking at the landscape.